The last light of day scattered across the dusty main street of Parowan, Utah. As Faith Howard hurried toward the general store, her heart pounding against her ribs like a frantic bird. The year was 1878, and at 22, Faith had learned that a woman alone must always be vigilant in these parts, especially as the day surrendered to dusk, and the saloon down the street began to fill with men whose inhibitions disappeared with each glass of whiskey. Faith pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she quickened her pace. She had stayed too long at Mrs. Peterson's, where she taught the woman's children their letters and sums 3 times a week. The payment wasn't much, but it helped supplement the meager earnings she made from sewing and mending for the townsfolk. Since her father's death 6 months ago, Faith had been struggling to maintain their small homestead just outside town. Her mother had passed when Faith was only 12, leaving just her and her father to face the harsh realities of life in the West. Now she was truly alone. The general store's bell jangled as Faith stepped inside, relieved to find Mr. Jacobson still behind the counter. "Evening, Miss Howard," he greeted with a kind smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Cutting it rather close today, aren't you? I'm afraid Mrs. Peterson's youngest was having trouble with his multiplication tables," Faith explained, setting her basket on the counter. "I hope I'm not keeping you." "Not at all. What can I help you with today?" Faith handed him a small list. "Just the essentials, please, and if you have any of that peppermint candy, I'd like a small piece." Mr. Jacobson's face softened. "Your father always did buy you peppermint on Fridays, didn't he?" Faith nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Some habits are hard to break. As Mr. Jacobson gathered her items, the bell above the door chimed again. Faith turned to see 3 men enter, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. She recognized them immediately, troublemakers who spent most of their days and nights at the Silver Dollar Saloon. The tallest one, Jed Kirby, fixed his bloodshot eyes on her, a slow smile spreading across his unshaven face. "Well, if it ain't the schoolmarm," he drawled, the stench of whiskey reaching her even from several feet away. Faith turned back to the counter, keeping her eyes down. "Mr. Jacobson, I believe I'm ready to pay now." The storekeeper seemed to sense her discomfort and hurried to complete her order. "That'll be 85 cents, Miss Howard." Faith counted out the coins with trembling fingers, aware of the men moving closer. "Ain't you gonna say hello, Miss Howard?" Jed slurred, leaning against the counter beside her. His companions snickered behind him. "Good evening, gentlemen," Faith replied stiffly, gathering her purchases into her basket. "Evening's just getting started," one of the others said. "Pretty lady like you shouldn't be rushing home all alone." Faith's stomach nodded. "Mr. Jacobson, thank you for your help. Good night." She moved toward the door, but Jed shifted to block her path. "Let me walk you home," he insisted, reaching for her arm. Dangerous for a woman to be out after dark. Faith stepped back. "No, thank you, I can manage." Mr. Jacobson came around the counter, his aged frame still imposing enough to command some respect. "That's enough, Kirby. Miss Howard has declined your offer." Jed's face darkened. "Wasn't talking to you, old man." "And I wasn't asking permission," Faith said with more courage than she felt. "Please step aside." For a tense moment, it seemed Jed might refuse, but then he gave an exaggerated bow and moved away from the door. "As the lady wishes. We'll just follow behind to make sure you get home safe." Faith's heart raced as she hurried out into the rapidly darkening street. She could hear the men laughing as they exited the store behind her. Instead of taking the main road toward her homestead, she cut down a side alley, hoping to lose them. The sound of heavy footsteps followed. "Where you going, Miss Howard?" Jed called after her. "Your place is the other way." Faith quickened her pace, nearly running now. When she reached the edge of town, she glanced back to see the 3 men still following, their drunken determination apparently overriding their usual laziness. With panic rising in her throat, Faith made a split-second decision. Instead of continuing on the road to her homestead, she veered toward the dense woods that bordered the western edge of Parowan. If she could lose them among the trees, she might be able to circle back once they gave up the chase. "Look at that, the little birds flying away." One of the men shouted, and the sound of their pursuit grew louder. Faith hitched up her skirts and ran in earnest now, her basket clutched tightly to her chest. The ground was uneven, and roots threatened to trip her at every step, but fear drove her deeper into the forest as the last light of day disappeared completely. Behind her, she could hear the men crashing through the underbrush, calling her name, their voices growing more menacing with each shout. Tears blurred her vision as she pushed forward, branches catching at her hair and clothes. "Come on out, Faith. We just want to talk." Jed's voice rang out, closer than she'd expected. Faith ducked behind a large pine tree, trying to quiet her ragged breathing. She couldn't outrun them forever, but perhaps she could hide until they passed by. Setting down her basket, she crouched low, pulling her dark shawl around her to blend with the shadows. The men's voices grew louder, then seemed to split off in different directions. They were spreading out to search for her. Faith closed her eyes, silently praying they would give up soon. Minutes stretched like hours as Faith remained motionless, afraid the slightest movement would give away her position. Her legs cramped from crouching, but she dared not shift her weight. A twig snapped nearby and Faith's breath caught in her throat. Heavy footsteps approached her hiding spot, and she pressed herself harder against the rough trunk of the pine. "Found anything yet?" Jed's voice called out from somewhere to her right. "Nothing over here," came the reply from further away. The footsteps moved past her tree, then stopped. Faith held her breath, certain she'd been discovered. But then the steps resumed, moving away from her position. Faith allowed herself a small sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. Another set of footsteps approached from a different direction, and this time they stopped directly on the other side of her tree. "Miss Howard," a voice whispered, so close it made her jump. "Don't be afraid." This voice was different, not one of her pursuers. It was low and steady, with none of the slurred menace of the drunken men. "They're gone now," the voice continued softly, "but we should stay quiet until they're farther away." Heart-pounding, Faith slowly turned to peer around the tree trunk. In the dim moonlight filtering through the branches, she could make out the silhouette of a man crouched beside her. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face, and his shoulders were broad beneath a leather vest. "Who are you?" Faith whispered, ready to flee if necessary. "Name's Zane," he replied, tipping his hat slightly. "I saw those men chasing you from town, thought you might need help." Faith studied him warily. Zane wasn't a name she recognized from Parowan, though she knew most of the townspeople. His clothes were trail-worn but well-kept, marking him as a traveler rather than a drifter. "How do I know you're not with them?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Adam's lips curved in a slight smile. "If I was, would I be whispering?" Despite her fear, Faith had to admit he had a point. Before she could respond, they both heard Jed's voice again, though it was farther away now. "Come on, boys. She can't have gone much farther, probably hiding like a scared rabbit." Adam put a finger to his lips, then gestured for Faith to remain still. They waited in tense silence as the voices of the drunken men gradually faded into the distance. "They're headed east," Adam finally said. "Away from town, probably think you're trying to reach the next settlement." He rose from his crouched position and offered her a hand. "You're safe now, but we should move. They might circle back." Faith hesitated, then accepted his hand, wincing as her cramped muscles protested. "My basket, got it," Adam said, retrieving it from where she'd set it down. "Where were you headed before those men started following you?" "Home." "I have a small homestead about half a mile north of town." Adam nodded. "I'll see you there safely." He paused, studying her face in the dim light. "Unless you'd prefer to find the sheriff," Faith shook her head. "Sheriff Davis is more likely to be drinking with those men than arresting them." It was a sad truth about Parowan's law enforcement. The sheriff was often more concerned with keeping the peace among the influential townsmen than protecting women like her. "I suspected as much," Adam replied with a hint of disgust. "Small towns like this, the law sometimes has flexible definitions of justice." As they began to walk carefully through the woods, Faith stole glances at her unexpected rescuer. In the occasional patches of moonlight, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s. His face was tanned from the sun, with strong features and eyes that seemed to catch even the faintest light. You're not from Parowan, Faith observed quietly as they navigated around a fallen log. Just passing through, Adam confirmed. Was planning to stay the night, then head toward Silver Reef tomorrow. Heard they're hiring at the mines there. You're a miner, Adam shook his head. Rancher by trade, but work's been scarce since my last outfit folded. I can turn my hand to most anything if it pays. They walked in silence for a few minutes, Adam occasionally stopping to listen for any sounds of pursuit. The forest was quiet now, save for the usual nighttime creatures and the soft rustle of wind through the pines. I'm Faith Howard, she finally offered, realizing she hadn't introduced herself. I know, Adam replied with a small smile. Heard those men calling your name. Besides, small towns usually only have one schoolmarm. I'm not officially the schoolmarm, Faith corrected him. I just teach a few of the local children whose parents can afford to pay for lessons. They had reached the edge of the woods now, and Faith could see the dim outline of her homestead in the distance, a small cabin with a lean-to stable beside it. That's my place, she said, pointing. Adam nodded, scanning the open ground between the forest and the cabin. No signs of those men. Looks like they really did head east, he turned to her. Still, I'll walk you to your door. Faith knew she should probably decline inviting a strange man to her home, even just to the doorstep wasn't proper. But the memory of Jed and his friends was still too fresh, and Adam had already proven himself trustworthy. Thank you, she said simply. They crossed the open field, Faith growing more tense with each step. The cabin had been lonely these past 6 months, but it had been home for nearly her entire life. The thought of those men knowing where she lived made her stomach churn with anxiety. You live here alone? Adam asked as they approached the cabin. Faith nodded. Since my father passed this spring. It was pneumonia, she added, though he hadn't asked. I'm sorry to hear that, Adam said, genuine sympathy in his voice. It's not easy losing family. Something in his tone made Faith wonder if he spoke from experience, but it wasn't her place to pry. They reached her front door, and Faith fished the key from her pocket. I should thank you properly for your help, Mr. Zane, she said, unlocking the door. Would you care for some coffee before you head back to town? Adam seemed surprised by the offer. That's kind of you, Miss Howard, but I wouldn't want to impose or cause talk. Faith felt a flush creep up her cheeks. Of course, a woman alone inviting a man into her home after dark would certainly cause gossip if anyone knew. But something about Adam Zane made her reluctant to simply bid him goodbye. Perhaps you could come by tomorrow, Faith suggested. In daylight, I could offer you a proper meal as thanks. Adam studied her for a moment, then nodded. That would be welcome. I was planning to leave town tomorrow, but I can delay a day. Faith smiled, relieved he had accepted. Around noon, then. I should be finished with my morning chores by then. Noon it is. Adam tipped his hat. Lock your door, Miss Howard. And if those men come back, there's a rifle by your door, use it. Faith's eyes widened. How did you know about the rifle? Every homestead has one, Adam replied with a slight smile. And judging by the way this place is kept up, you're not the type to let your father's rifle gather dust. Faith couldn't help but return his smile. You're observant, Mr. Zane, comes with the territory. He stepped back from her door. Good night, Miss Howard. Good night, Mr. Zane, and thank you again. Faith watched from her window as Adam crossed back toward the road, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness. Only when he was completely out of sight did she move away from the window, her mind whirling with thoughts of the strange evening and her even stranger rescuer. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the early autumn sun casting long shadows across Faith's small property. She rose earlier than usual, feeling both anxious and oddly excited about Adam Zane's impending visit. After feeding her few animals, a milk cow, 2 chickens, and the old mare her father had used for plowing, Faith turned her attention to the cabin. It was always neat and clean, but today she found herself taking extra care with everything. She swept the plank floors, dusted the few shelves of books her father had collected over the years, and even cut some late wildflowers to place in a jar on the table. By mid-morning, Faith had started preparing a meal that would stretch her limited supplies without appearing too meager. A stew with vegetables from her garden, fresh bread she'd baked the day before, and the last of her preserved peaches for dessert. As she worked, Faith found herself wondering more about Adam Zane. He wasn't like the rough men who typically passed through Parowan. There was an intelligence in his eyes, a thoughtfulness in his manner that spoke of education and refinement, despite his weathered appearance. Just before noon, Faith changed into her second-best dress, a blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, or so her father had always said. She brushed her chestnut hair until it shone, then pinned it up neatly at the nape of her neck. Looking in the small mirror above her washstand, Faith barely recognized the flushed, expectant face that stared back at her. "This is ridiculous," she scolded her reflection. "He's just a passing stranger who showed kindness, nothing more." A knock at the door made her start. Faith smoothed her hands down her dress and took a deep breath before opening it. Adam Zane stood on her doorstep, hat in hand. In the clear light of day, Faith could see him properly for the first time. He was indeed handsome, with dark hair that curled slightly where it fell across his forehead, and eyes the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue. He'd shaved and changed his clothes, his clean shirt and less dusty trousers suggesting he'd made an effort for this visit. "Miss Howard," he greeted her with a smile that transformed his serious face. "I hope I'm not early." "Not at all, Mr. Zane," Faith replied, stepping back to allow him entry. "Please come in." Adam ducked slightly to enter the cabin, his tall frame making the space seem smaller than it was. He glanced around with appreciation at the simple but well-kept interior. "You have a fine home," he said, setting his hat on a hook by the door. "It speaks well of you and your father that you've maintained it so carefully." Faith felt a warmth in her chest at his words. "Thank you. It's not much, but it's ours mine now, I suppose." There was an awkward moment as they stood there, two strangers brought together by unusual circumstances, unsure of the proper protocol for their situation. "I've prepared some stew," Faith finally said, gesturing toward the pot simmering on the stove. "It's nothing fancy, but it smells wonderful," Adam interrupted with genuine enthusiasm. "I've been living on jerky and hardtack for so long, home cooking seems like a luxury." Faith smiled, relaxing a little as she moved to the stove. "Please sit down. Would you like coffee?" "Or I have some fresh milk from this morning." "Coffee would be fine, thank you." Adam settled onto one of the chairs at the small table. "How are you feeling today? After last night's ordeal, I mean." Faith poured coffee for them both before answering. "Better than I expected." "I was shaken, certainly, but knowing those men went in the opposite direction of my home has helped ease my mind." Adam nodded, his expression turning serious. "I checked with the livery stable owner this morning. Those three rode out at dawn, heading toward Cedar City. Apparently one of them has family there." Relief washed over Faith. "You checked for me?" "I wanted to be certain you were safe," Adam said simply, accepting the cup she offered him. No one should have to live in fear in their own home. Faith sat across from him, warmed by his consideration. "Well, I'm grateful for everything." Adam smiled again, and Faith noticed a small scar at the corner of his mouth that pulled slightly when his lips curved. It gave his smile a distinctive character that she found oddly charming. "You mentioned you're a rancher," Faith said as she ladled stew into bowls for them. "Where was your last outfit?" "Wyoming Territory," Adam replied, waiting politely until she was seated before starting to eat. "Beautiful country, but the winter of '76 was brutal. Lost nearly half the herd to the cold. The owner decided to sell what was left and retire." "So you've been traveling since then?" Adam nodded, taking a bite of stew, his eyes widened in appreciation. "This is delicious, Miss Howard. Thank you, and please call me Faith." "Faith," he repeated, as if trying out the sound of her name. "It suits you." They ate in companionable silence for a few moments, the tension that had initially filled the room gradually easing. "What about you?" Adam finally asked. "Have you lived in Parowan your whole life?" Faith nodded. "Born and raised. My parents came here in '51, right after the town was settled. They were among the original Mormon families sent by Brigham Young." "But you're not Mormon now?" Adam asked, noticing there were none of the usual symbols of the faith visible in the cabin. Faith shook her head. My mother died when I was 12. My father had questions about certain church doctrines. Eventually, we stopped attending. It made things difficult sometimes, being outside the faith in a Mormon settlement, but most people were kind enough once they got used to us. And now. Do you plan to stay in Parowan? The question gave Faith pause. She had never seriously considered leaving, even after her father's death. The homestead was her only inheritance, her only security. I haven't thought much beyond keeping this place running, she admitted. Teaching the Peterson children and doing mending for town families brings in just enough to get by. I'm not sure what else I would do or where I would go. Adam seemed to consider this. You're educated, more than most women in these parts, I'd wager. Surely there are opportunities for someone with your skills. Perhaps in larger towns, Faith conceded. But traveling alone as a woman isn't exactly safe, as last night demonstrated. A shadow crossed Adam's face. No, it isn't, and that's a damn shame. They finished their meal, conversation flowing more easily as they grew more comfortable with each other. Faith found herself telling Adam about her hopes to someday open a proper school in Parowan, while he shared stories of his travels across the Western Territories. You've seen so much of the country, Faith said wistfully as they finished the preserved peaches. The farthest I've ever been is Cedar City, and that was years ago. The West is changing fast, Adam replied. The railroads are pushing farther every year. Places that used to take weeks to reach are now just days away. Who knows, maybe someday you'll see more of it yourself. Faith smiled at the thought, though it seemed like an impossible dream. Perhaps, but for now I have responsibilities here. After the meal, Faith expected Adam to take his leave, but he surprised her by offering to help with the dishes. They stood side by side at her small wash basin, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms tanned by the sun. You know, Adam said as he dried a plate, I noticed your corral fence could use some repair. The north side is sagging quite a bit. Faith sighed. Yes, I've been meaning to fix it, but there never seems to be time or enough hands. I could take a look at it for you, Adam offered casually. I'm handy with tools and it wouldn't take long. Faith turned to him in surprise. But you said you were leaving today. Adam shrugged, not quite meeting her eyes. Plans change. Besides, I owe a favor to that livery stable owner. Promise to help him with some repairs in exchange for a discount on boarding my horse. Faith wasn't entirely convinced by this explanation, but she wasn't about to refuse his help. If you're sure it's no trouble. None at all. They spent the rest of the afternoon working on the corral fence. Adam proved to be as skilled as he claimed, efficiently replacing broken rails and reinforcing weak spots. Faith worked alongside him, holding boards in place and handing him tools from her father's collection. It was strangely comfortable, this shared labor. Faith found herself laughing more than she had in months as Adam told stories about his misadventures as a young cowhand. So there I was, he was saying as he hammered a nail into place, 16 years old and convinced I knew everything about horses. This stallion had thrown every hand on the ranch, but I just knew I could break him. Faith smiled, already anticipating the outcome. Let me guess he threw you as well. Worse, Adam grimaced. He threw me, then decided to chase me around the corral for good measure. I had to dive under the fence to escape, right into a mud puddle. The other hands never let me live it down. Faith laughed, the sound surprising her with its freedom. Pride does tend to precede a fall, doesn't it? In my case, a very muddy one, Adam agreed with a grin. By the time they finished the repairs, the sun was beginning to set. Faith stood back to admire their work, a sense of accomplishment warming her even as the autumn air grew cooler. It looks better than it has in years, she said gratefully. I can't thank you enough, Adam. It was my pleasure, he replied, his eyes lingering on her face a moment longer than necessary. Though I should probably head back to town before it gets too dark. Faith felt a sudden reluctance to see him go. The day had been unexpectedly pleasant, filled with easy conversation and shared work. She had almost forgotten the frightening events that had led to their meeting. Will you be leaving Parowan tomorrow? She asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Adam hesitated. I'm not certain. The livery owner mentioned he could use help for a few more days. He paused, then added more quietly, "And I find I'm not in as much of a hurry to reach Silver Reef as I thought." Hope flickered in Faith's chest, though she tried to temper it. "Well, if you're still in town tomorrow, perhaps you might. That is, I usually take Sunday afternoons for a walk. The hills to the west of town are particularly lovely this time of year." Adam's smile returned, warm and genuine. "Is that so? I'm fond of a good walk myself. Perhaps I'll explore those hills tomorrow afternoon as well." Faith felt her cheeks flush, but she met his gaze steadily. "Around 2 o'clock would be a fine time for such a walk. The light is best then." 2 o'clock it is," Adam agreed, picking up his hat from where he'd placed it on the fence post. "Thank you for the meal, Faith, and the company." "Thank you for the fence," she replied, "and for last night. I don't know what might have happened if you hadn't been there." A shadow crossed Adam's face. "Best not to dwell on it. Those men are gone, and you're safe." Faith nodded, though she couldn't completely dismiss the fear that still lingered from the encounter. "Will I see you at the church tomorrow morning? Most of the town attends, even those who aren't members of the faith." Adam shook his head. "I'm not much for organized religion, no offense meant, none taken," Faith assured him. "As I said, my father and I drifted away from the church years ago. I only attend occasionally to avoid raising eyebrows more than they already are." Adam studied her for a moment. "You care what they think, these townspeople?" Faith considered the question seriously. "Not for my own sake so much, but I need their goodwill to make a living. Without the sewing work and the teaching, I couldn't keep this place." Understanding dawned in Adam's eyes. "So you'll see me on the western hills tomorrow, not in town where people might talk." Faith flushed, embarrassed that he had seen through her so easily. "I didn't mean it's all right," Adam interrupted gently. "I understand the precarious position of a woman alone in a small town. Your reputation is important, and I'd never want to damage it." Relief flooded Faith at his understanding. "Thank you. It's not that I'm ashamed to be seen with you, it's just, you don't need to explain," Adam assured her. 2 o'clock, Western Hills. I'll look forward to it." With a tip of his hat, Adam turned and walked back toward town, his long strides quickly carrying him away from the homestead. Faith watched until he disappeared around the bend in the road, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. That night, as Faith prepared for bed, she found herself thinking of Zane's smile, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, the strength and gentleness in his hands as they worked together. It had been so long since she'd had real companionship, years, perhaps, since her father's health had begun to fail long before he finally succumbed to pneumonia. "Don't be foolish," she whispered to herself as she blew out her lamp. "He's passing through, nothing more. Don't build castles in the air." But as sleep claimed her, Faith couldn't help but hope that Adam might find reason to stay in Parowan a little longer. Sunday dawned crisp and bright, the autumn sky a clear, piercing blue. Faith attended church as usual, sitting quietly in the back row as the Mormon congregation sang hymns and listened to sermons. She noticed a few glances in her direction. There were always whispers about the Howard family's lapsed faith, but most of the townsfolk were polite enough. After the service, Faith exchanged pleasantries with Mrs. Peterson about the children's progress and promised Mr. Jacobson she would have his shirts mended by Tuesday. All the while, her thoughts kept drifting to her planned walk later that afternoon. Faith returned home to prepare a simple midday meal for herself. As she ate, she couldn't help but glance repeatedly at the small clock on the mantel, watching as the minutes ticked closer to 2 o'clock. She changed into her walking dress, a practical brown skirt and jacket over a cream blouse, and pinned her hair up neatly beneath her bonnet. At 1:45, Faith set out for the Western Hills, a small basket over her arm containing a book and a few apples. The path was well worn but not heavily traveled, especially on a Sunday when most families remained close to home after church. The hills gradually rose from the valley floor, covered in sage and scattered pines. Faith followed the path upward, enjoying the subtle shift in vegetation as she climbed. By the time she reached her favorite spot, a natural clearing that offered a view of the entire valley, it was exactly 2 o'clock. Faith scanned the hillside, looking for any sign of Adam. Had she misunderstood? Perhaps he'd already decided to leave town after all. A pang of disappointment shot through her at the thought. Beautiful view, a familiar voice said from behind her. Faith turned, unable to contain her smile as she saw Adam approaching from a different path than the one she'd taken. He was dressed much as he had been the day before, though his shirt was a deep green today, and he carried a small package wrapped in paper. "You came," Faith said, immediately regretting how revealing those two simple words were. "I said I would," Adam replied, his eyes warm as they met hers. "I'm a man of my word," Faith Howard. They stood for a moment, simply looking at each other before Faith gestured toward a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. "Shall we sit? This is my favorite spot to read on Sunday afternoons." Adam nodded, following her to the makeshift bench. "Do you come here often?" "Whenever the weather permits," Faith said, settling her skirts around her. "It's peaceful. Sometimes I bring a book, sometimes I just think." "About what?" Adam asked, sitting beside her, close but not too close. Faith considered the question. "The future, mostly. What will become of the homestead? Whether I should try to sell it and start fresh somewhere else. And have you reached any conclusions?" "Not yet." Faith looked out over the valley, toward her small cabin visible in the distance. "It's difficult to leave the only home you've ever known, even when staying means struggle." Adam followed her gaze. "I understand that better than most. I left home at 16, and there are still days I wonder if it was the right choice." "Why did you leave?" Faith asked, turning to study his profile. A shadow passed over Adam's face. "My father was a hard man, expected his sons to follow in his footsteps without question. My older brother, Michael, was happy to oblige, took to ranching like he was born to it. But I wanted more than just cattle and endless work. I wanted to see what else the world had to offer. So you left." Adam nodded. "In the middle of the night, left a note saying not to look for me, headed west and never looked back." He paused, then added quietly, "At least that's what I tell myself." Faith heard the regret in his voice and instinctively reached out, placing her hand lightly on his arm. "Do you know what became of them? Your family?" "Last I heard, my father passed 3 years ago. Michael took over the ranch. My mother still lives there, I expect." "You haven't written to them?" Adam shook his head. "Pride, stubbornness, fear of rejection, take your pick." He smiled ruefully. "Not my finest qualities." Faith squeezed his arm gently before withdrawing her hand. "It's never too late to reach out. Family is precious. Once it's gone, there's no replacing it." "You speak from experience," Adam observed. "Yes," Faith said simply. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the gentle breeze rustling the sage around them. Finally, Adam seemed to shake off his melancholy and reached for the paper-wrapped package beside him. "I brought something," he said, offering it to her. "A small thank you for yesterday's meal." Faith accepted the package with surprise. "You didn't need to bring me anything." "Open it," Adam encouraged, a hint of boyish eagerness in his expression. Faith carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a small wooden box beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers around the edges. "Oh, Adam," she breathed, running her fingers over the detailed craftsmanship. "It's lovely." "Did you make this?" Adam nodded, looking pleased at her reaction. "Last night at the boarding house, the owner let me use some scraps of wood and his tools." "You carved this in one evening?" Faith marveled, opening the hinged lid to find the interior lined with a scrap of soft fabric. "It's exquisite. I've always been good with my hands," Adam said, a touch of pride in his voice. "My father taught me carpentry along with ranching, said a man should know how to build the things he needs." "He taught you well," Faith said, closing the box carefully. "Thank you, I'll treasure it." Adam's smile deepened, creating that fascinating pull at the corner of his mouth where the scar was. "I'm glad you like it." "How did you get that?" Faith asked impulsively, gesturing toward the small scar. "If you don't mind my asking." Adam touched the corner of his mouth, looking surprised. "This bar fight in Cheyenne about 5 years ago. Man accused me of cheating at cards. I wasn't, but he had a ring that caught me when he threw a punch." "Did you win the fight?" Faith asked, surprising herself with the question. Adam laughed. "No, madam, I did not. Got thrown out on my ear with a bleeding face for my troubles. But I learned a valuable lesson about choosing card partners more carefully." Faith found herself laughing with him, drawn to his easy honesty and self-deprecating humor. There was no false pride about Zane, no posturing like so many men she had known. They spent the next 2 hours talking about everything and nothing: books they had read, places Adam had seen in his travels, Faith's hopes for establishing a proper school someday. Faith shared apples from her basket, and Adam told her about the stars he'd learned to navigate by during nights spent on the open range. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the valley in gold and amber, Faith reluctantly admitted it was time to return home. "May I walk you back?" Adam asked as they rose from the log. Faith hesitated, aware of the potential for gossip if they were seen together. But the path to her homestead skirted the edge of town, and they were unlikely to encounter many people on a Sunday evening. Yes, she decided. "I'd like that." They walked side by side down the hillside, close but not touching, their conversation continuing effortlessly. Faith couldn't remember when she had last felt so comfortable with another person, so free to speak her mind without fear of judgment. "Will you be staying in Parowan much longer?" she finally asked as they approached her homestead, the question she'd been avoiding all afternoon. Adam was silent for a moment. "I had planned to leave tomorrow," he admitted. "But the livery owner has offered me work for the week, helping with some repairs and exercising the horses that board there. It seems like a good opportunity to earn some money before heading to Silver Reef." Hope blossomed in Faith's chest, though she tried not to show it. "That sounds sensible." They reached her front door, and an awkward silence fell between them, neither quite ready to say goodbye. "Thank you again for the box," Faith said, holding the small carved treasure close. "It's the most beautiful gift I've received in a very long time." "I'm glad you like it," Adam replied, his voice softer than usual. He seemed about to say something else, then thought better of it. "Good night, Faith." "Good night, Adam." He tipped his hat and turned to go, but then paused and looked back. "Would it be presumptuous of me to ask if you might be free for another walk tomorrow evening? After your teaching is done for the day?" Faith felt warmth spread through her at the invitation. "Not presumptuous at all. I usually finish with the Peterson children around 4:30 then. I could meet you at the edge of town where the path branches toward your homestead." "I'll be there," Faith promised, unable to contain her smile. Adam's answering smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Until tomorrow, then." Faith watched him walk away, the wooden box clutched to her chest, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The next week passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing affection. True to his word, Adam met Faith each evening after her teaching duties were complete. They walked together along the less traveled paths around Parowan, talking for hours about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Faith learned that Adam had spent time as a scout for the army, a cattle driver, and even briefly as a deputy in a small town in Colorado. Adam discovered Faith's passion for teaching, her knowledge of botany learned from her mother, and her secret desire to someday see the ocean. On Wednesday, Adam surprised her by bringing his horse a handsome bay gelding named Rusty and teaching Faith to ride properly. She had only ever ridden her father's old mare, and the experience of sitting astride a powerful, responsive horse was exhilarating. "You're a natural," Adam had said admiringly as Faith guided Rusty through a series of turns. "Most city-raised ladies would be terrified." "I'm hardly a city lady," Faith had laughed, patting the horse's neck with genuine affection. "And I've never seen the point of fear when learning is so much more rewarding." By Friday, Faith could no longer deny to herself that she was falling in love with Zane. His kindness, his integrity, his gentle strength all had woven themselves into her heart with a swiftness that should have frightened her, but somehow didn't. What did frighten her was the knowledge that his work at the livery stable would end soon. Adam hadn't mentioned leaving again, but Faith knew the question of his departure hung between them, unspoken but ever present. Saturday morning found Faith in town, delivering mended shirts to Mr. Jacobson at the general store. As she completed the transaction, the bell above the door jangled, and Faith turned to see Mrs. Peterson entering with her youngest son in tow. "Miss Howard," the woman exclaimed with a warm smile, "just the person I hoped to see. I wanted to ask if you might be available for an extra lesson this afternoon. Robert is struggling with his division, and his father insists he master it before Monday." Faith hesitated, thinking of her plans to meet Adam later. "I'm afraid I have a prior engagement this afternoon, Mrs. Peterson. But I could come early on Monday, before your other children's lesson." Mrs. Peterson looked disappointed but nodded her understanding. "Monday will have to do then." She paused, a knowing look crossing her face. "Would this prior engagement have anything to do with the handsome stranger who's been working at the livery? The one people have seen walking with you in the evenings." Faith felt heat rise to her cheeks, so people had noticed after all. "Mr. Zane is a friend," she said carefully. "He was kind enough to help me repair my corral fence last weekend." "Just a friend," Mrs. Peterson pressed, her tone teasing but kind. "My dear, I haven't seen you smile so much since before your father fell ill. And Mr. Jenkins at the livery says this cowboy of yours has been asking about land prices in the area." Faith's heart skipped a beat. "Land prices? Are you certain?" Mrs. Peterson nodded, looking pleased at Faith's reaction. "Quite certain. Jenkins was telling my husband all about it yesterday. Said the young man was particularly interested in properties neighboring your homestead." Before Faith could respond, the door opened again, and Adam himself walked in, stopping short when he saw Faith standing there. "Good morning," he said, tipping his hat to both women. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mr. Zane," Mrs. Peterson replied with a smile that was a touch too knowing for Faith's comfort. "Miss Howard and I were just discussing lesson schedules. I'll leave you to your shopping." With a meaningful glance at Faith, she added, "Monday morning then, Miss Howard. 8 o'clock. "Yes, that will be fine," Faith managed, her mind still whirling from what Mrs. Peterson had revealed about Adam's inquiries. As the woman moved away to examine fabrics at the far counter, Adam stepped closer to Faith, his voice low. "I was hoping to find you. There's something I wanted to discuss. Would you be free earlier today, say noon instead of our usual time?" Faith studied his face, trying to read his intentions. Was he planning to tell her he was leaving? Or could Mrs. Peterson's information be accurate? "Yes, noon would be fine," Faith replied. "Shall I meet you at our usual spot?" Adam shook his head. "I thought we might ride out to the North Valley. There's something there I'd like to show you." "I can bring Rusty and borrow a gentle mare from the livery for you." Curiosity piqued, Faith nodded. "I'll be ready at noon." Adam smiled, that wonderful crooked smile that never failed to warm Faith's heart. "Until then," he said softly, then moved past her to speak with Mr. Jacobson about supplies. Faith left the store, her mind racing with possibilities. The North Valley contained several abandoned homesteads, places where settlers had tried and failed to make the harsh land yield a living. Could Adam be considering purchasing one of them? And if so, did that mean he was planning to stay in Parowan? The morning crawled by as Faith completed her chores with half her attention, her thoughts constantly returning to the upcoming ride with Adam. By the time noon approached, she had changed her dress twice and rearranged her hair 3 times, disgusted with herself for such schoolgirl behavior but unable to calm her nerves. Adam arrived precisely at noon, leading Rusty and a dappled gray mare. He had dressed with unusual care. Faith noticed his best shirt and a newly brushed hat, his boots polished to a shine. "You look lovely," Adam said as he helped her mount the mare. "That blue suits you." "Thank you," Faith replied, settling into the saddle. "You're looking rather dapper yourself." A faint flush colored Adam's cheeks. "Jenkins's wife insisted on pressing my shirt when she heard I was taking a lady riding, said I shouldn't look like I'd been sleeping in a barn." Faith laughed. "Mrs. Jenkins is a wise woman." They rode north out of town, following a trail that wound through scrubby pine and sage. Adam seemed uncharacteristically quiet, almost nervous, which only heightened Faith's curiosity about their destination. After about half an hour of riding, they crested a small rise, and the North Valley spread before them. Unlike the main valley where Parowan sat, this smaller depression was less developed, with only a few scattered homesteads visible in the distance. Adam pointed toward one such homestead, where a modest cabin stood surrounded by what had once been cultivated fields, now returned partially to wild grasses. A small stream ran near the property, its course marked by a line of cottonwood trees. "That's where we're headed," Adam said, urging Rusty forward down the gentle slope. As they approached, Faith could see the cabin was in reasonable repair, though clearly unoccupied for some time. The roof appeared sound, and the small barn beside it still stood straight and true. They dismounted in front of the cabin, and Adam tied the horses to a hitching post that had weathered to silver gray. "Whose place is this?" Faith asked, taking in the beautiful setting with the mountains rising behind the property and the valley spreading before it. "Currently, it belongs to Mr. Jacobson," Adam replied, a hint of tension in his voice. "The previous owners left 2 years ago when the husband took ill, and they returned east to be with family. Jacobson bought it at auction, thinking he might set up his son here someday, but the boy has decided to pursue schooling in Salt Lake City instead." Faith turned to Adam, beginning to understand. "And you're interested in purchasing it?" Adam nodded, watching her face carefully. "I've made an offer. Jacobson accepted this morning." He took a deep breath, then continued in a rush. "Faith, I know we've only known each other for a short time, but these past days have been the happiest I can remember. Being with you, it feels right in a way nothing else ever has." Faith's heart began to race as Adam took her hands in his. "I came to Parowan with no plans to stay," he continued, his gray-blue eyes intense as they held hers. "But then I found you hiding in those woods, and something changed. I started to see possibilities I hadn't considered before: a home, roots, a future that isn't just wandering from job to job." "Adam," Faith whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I'm not a wealthy man," Adam went on, his hands tightening around hers. "But I know ranching, and this land has good water and grazing potential. With work and time, it could become something worthwhile, something to build a life on." Faith felt tears gathering in her eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" Adam swallowed hard. "Because I'm hoping it might be a life we could build together." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small object. "This was my mother's," he said, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl set into it. "I've carried it with me all these years, even when I was too stubborn to write home." Faith stared at the ring, then back at Adam's face. "I know it's sudden," he said, uncertainty creeping into his voice for the first time. "If you need time to consider." Faith didn't let him finish. Acting on impulse and the certainty in her heart, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that started as gentle, but quickly deepened with the force of feelings too long constrained by propriety. Adam seemed stunned for a moment, then responded with equal fervor, his free arm wrapping around her waist to draw her closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing rapidly, and Adam's eyes had darkened to the color of storm clouds. "Is that a yes?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Faith laughed, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. "Yes, Adam Zane, yes, I will build a life with you." Adam's face transformed with a smile so brilliant it rivaled the sun. He slipped the ring onto her finger where it fit as if made for her. "I love you, Faith Howard," he said, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you were so brave even in the face of danger." "And I love you," Faith replied, her voice steady despite the tears of happiness that spilled down her cheeks. "Though I was considerably slower to admit it to myself." Adam laughed and kissed her again, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, they were both laughing, giddy with the wonder of newfound love and the promise of a future together. "When?" Faith asked, looking down at the pearl ring that now adorned her finger. "When shall we marry?" "As soon as you're ready," Adam replied. "Tomorrow or next month or next year, though I confess I'm hoping for sooner rather than later." Faith considered. There was no reason to wait, really. She had no family to consult, no elaborate preparations to make, and the thought of beginning their life together without delay was deeply appealing. "Next Sunday," she decided. "After church, Reverend Johnson can perform the ceremony." She looked up at Adam with a teasing smile. That is, if you can bring yourself to enter a church for the occasion, Adam laughed. For you, I'd brave a dozen churches. His expression grew more serious. Are you certain, Faith? This is all happening very quickly. I don't want you to have regrets. Faith shook her head, more certain than she had been of anything in a very long time. The only regret I would have is letting happiness slip away because I was too cautious to grasp it. Adam pulled her close again, his arms strong and secure around her. Then next Sunday it is. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring their future home, making plans for repairs and improvements, discussing which of Faith's belongings would come with them and what they would need to acquire. The abandoned homestead gradually transformed in their minds from a neglected property to a home filled with possibility. As the sun began to set, they reluctantly mounted their horses for the ride back to town. Faith knew there would be talk when news of their engagement spread, and spread it would, as soon as Mrs. Peterson spotted the ring on her finger. But for once, Faith found she didn't care what the townspeople might say. Let them talk. She had found something precious, something worth any amount of gossip. What about Silver Reef? Faith asked suddenly as they rode side by side in the gathering twilight. You had planned to find work in the mines there. Adam reached across the space between them to take her hand. Silver Reef can find another miner. I've found something far more valuable right here in Parowan. The following week was a whirlwind of preparations. Faith gave notice to the families whose children she taught, explaining that she would be moving to the North Valley after her marriage, but offering to continue lessons if they were willing to send the children the additional distance. Mrs. Peterson, far from being scandalized by the rapid courtship, was delighted. She insisted on hosting a small gathering at her home after the ceremony and recruited several other women to help prepare food for the celebration. Adam spent the week working from dawn until dusk to make the North Valley cabin habitable. He replaced broken window panes, mended the roof where it had begun to leak, and repaired the stove that would be essential as winter approached. Faith rode out each afternoon to help, bringing curtains she had sewn and preserves from her pantry to stock the new home. By Saturday evening, both were exhausted but filled with anticipation for the next day's ceremony. Faith had declined Mrs. Peterson's offer to stay at her home for the night before the wedding, preferring to spend her last night as a single woman in the cabin where she had grown up. As Faith prepared for bed that final evening, she found herself drawn to the small trunk that contained her mother's few possessions. Among them was a wedding dress of cream-colored silk, carefully preserved for over 20 years. Faith lifted it out, holding it against herself in front of her small mirror. It would need minor alterations, but the simple, elegant style suited her. I wish you could be here, Mother, Faith whispered to the empty room. I think you would approve of Adam. She smiled at the thought, almost able to imagine her mother's warm response. Faith was just about to put the dress away when a sound from outside caught her attention. Horses approaching at a gallop, multiple riders by the sound of it. Frowning, she moved to the window, peering out into the moonlit yard. 3 riders pulled up in front of her cabin, and Faith's blood ran cold as she recognized them. Jed Kirby and his friends, the same men who had chased her into the woods just over a week ago. They were supposed to be in Cedar City. What were they doing back in Parowan, and why were they at her home? Faith quickly moved away from the window, her mind racing. The rifle Adam had mentioned was indeed by the door, loaded as her father had always kept it, but the thought of using it against 3 drunken men filled her with dread. A heavy fist pounded on her door. Miss Howard. Jed's slurred voice called out. We know you're in there. Come on out and say hello to your old friends. Faith remained silent, hoping against hope that they might believe the cabin empty and leave, but the pounding only grew more insistent. We saw the light in your window, Miss Howard, another voice joined in. Don't be unfriendly now. Faith's hands trembled as she reached for the rifle. Even if she managed to frighten them off, they knew where she lived. They could return any time. And tomorrow was her wedding day. The thought of these men ruining what should be the happiest day of her life filled her with a determination that overrode her fear. Moving quietly to the door, Faith called out in a voice steadier than she felt. You need to leave, Mr. Kirby. I have a rifle and I know how to use it. There was a moment of silence, then raucous laughter. Listen to the little schoolmarm, boys. She's got a rifle, Jed mocked. What are you going to do, Miss Howard? Shoot all three of us? If necessary, Faith replied, though the thought made her stomach clench. She had never fired the rifle at anything larger than rabbits raiding her garden. The men conferred in low voices, then Jed spoke again. We just want to talk, Miss Howard. No need for rifles. Heard you're getting married tomorrow. Wanted to offer our congratulations. Thank you for your kind wishes, Faith said through the door, not believing them for a moment. Now please leave my property. Instead of retreating, she heard the sound of boots on her porch steps. Maybe we should give the bride a wedding present, one of the men suggested, his tone sending a chill down Faith's spine. Faith adjusted her grip on the rifle, her palms sweaty against the smooth wood. This is your final warning, she called out. Leave now or I will defend myself. The door handle rattled as someone tried to turn it. Finding it locked, there was a moment of frustrated muttering, then a sudden loud crash as a boot slammed against the wood. The old door shuddered but held. Faith raised the rifle, pointing it at the door, her finger trembling near the trigger. Another crash and the wood around the lock began to splinter. One more kick would likely break it completely. Just as Faith was steeling herself to fire a warning shot, she heard the sound of another horse approaching at a gallop. The men on her porch fell silent, turning toward the newcomer. What the hell do you think you're doing? Adam's voice rang out, filled with a cold fury Faith had never heard from him before. Mind your own business, cowboy, Jed shot back. This is between us and Miss Howard. Miss Howard is my business, Adam replied, his voice closer now. He must have dismounted. And you're trespassing on her property. Faith moved to the window, rifle still in hand, to see Adam standing in her yard, facing the three men who had descended from her porch to confront him. Even in the moonlight, she could see the tension in his stance, like a coiled spring ready to release. You're that fella from the woods, one of the men said, recognition dawning. The one who interfered before. That's right, Adam confirmed, and I'm interfering again. Get on your horses and ride away, and maybe you'll leave with all your teeth intact, Jed laughed, though there was an edge of uncertainty to it now. There's three of us and one of you, mister, not good odds. I've faced worse, Adam replied evenly. But if you prefer, we could involve the sheriff. Breaking and entering, threatening a woman, even Sheriff Davis would have trouble overlooking that, especially with a witness. The men hesitated, looking at each other. Faith could see they were weighing their options, their alcohol-fueled bravado beginning to falter in the face of Adam's calm determination. This ain't over, Jed finally spat, backing toward his horse. You two deserve each other, the uppity schoolmarm and the meddling cowboy. You're right about one thing, Adam said, not moving from his position between the men and Faith's door. We do deserve each other, and tomorrow Miss Howard becomes Mrs. Zane. So unless you want to be my wedding gift to her delivered to the sheriff's office with a few dents in your skulls, I suggest you leave Parowan tonight and never come back. There was real menace in Adam's voice now, a promise of violence that even the drunken men couldn't mistake. Without another word, they mounted their horses and rode away, though not without a final glare of hatred from Jed. Adam watched until they were well down the road before turning to Faith's door. Faith, are you all right? Faith lowered the rifle and rushed to unlock the door, flinging it open to find Adam standing there, concern etched deeply on his face. Without hesitation, she threw herself into his arms, the rifle clattering to the porch beside them. I'm all right, she assured him, her voice muffled against his chest. But how did you know they were here? Adam held her tightly, his heart hammering against her cheek. Jenkins's son saw them ride into town and recognized them from the description I'd given his father. The boy came running to find me at the cabin. I rode as fast as Rusty could carry me. He pulled back slightly to look at her face. Are you sure you're not hurt? Did they touch you? Faith shook her head. They were trying to break down the door when you arrived. Another minute and I might have had to shoot someone. Adam's expression darkened. I should have followed them that night, made sure they were truly gone. He cupped her face in his hands. I'm sorry, Faith, I should have protected you better. You did protect me, Faith insisted, placing her hands over his. Both times, and I was prepared to protect myself as well. She glanced at the rifle lying on the porch. Though I'm grateful it didn't come to that, Adam smiled faintly. My brave Faith. He bent to kiss her forehead. Still, I think I should stay here tonight to make sure they don't come back. I can sleep on the porch. No, Faith interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. I mean, yes, you should stay, but not on the porch. It's too cold. She hesitated, then continued more quietly. My father's room has been empty since he passed. You could stay there. Adam searched her eyes. Are you certain? People might talk if they knew I stayed the night before our wedding. Faith laughed softly. Let them talk. After tomorrow, it won't matter anyway. Adam nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. I should check on the horses, make sure Rusty is secured for the night. While Adam tended to the animals, Faith quickly prepared her father's room, changing the linens and airing out the space that had been closed up for months. By the time Adam returned, she had a simple meal laid out on the table: bread, cheese, and some of her preserved apples. I know it's not much, Faith apologized as they sat down together. I wasn't expecting company. It's perfect, Adam assured her, reaching across the table to take her hand. Just like tomorrow will be perfect, regardless of shabby beginnings. Faith squeezed his hand, overwhelmed with gratitude for this man who had come into her life so unexpectedly and changed it so completely. I love you, Adam Zane, and I love you, Faith Howard, he replied, his smile illuminating his entire face. Soon to be Faith Zane. They ate together, talking of their plans for the farm and their future, deliberately turning their thoughts away from the unpleasant interruption of the evening. When the meal was finished, Faith showed Adam to her father's room, providing him with a nightshirt that had belonged to the older man. It might be a bit short, she warned, but it's clean. Adam accepted it with a smile. I'm sure it will be fine, thank you, Faith. They stood in the hallway between the two bedrooms, suddenly awkward in the intimate setting. Well, Faith said, taking a step back toward her own room. Good night, then. Good night, Adam replied softly. Sleep well, Faith. Tomorrow is a new beginning for both of us. Faith nodded, then impulsively stepped forward to kiss him once more before retreating to her room. As she changed into her nightgown and slipped beneath the quilt, she could hear Adam moving about in her father's room, the creak of the bed as he sat on it, the soft thud of boots being removed. There was something profoundly comforting about knowing he was there, just on the other side of the wall. After months of sleeping alone in the empty cabin, the presence of another person of Adam made Faith feel safe in a way she hadn't since her father died. With a smile on her lips, Faith closed her eyes and fell into a peaceful sleep, dreams of tomorrow filling her mind. Sunday dawned clear and crisp, a perfect autumn day for a wedding. Faith woke early, her excitement making further sleep impossible. She could smell coffee brewing and hear Adam moving quietly in the kitchen, trying not to disturb her. Smiling to herself, Faith rose and dressed quickly in a simple morning dress. She would change into her mother's wedding gown later, before they left for the church. Good morning, she greeted Adam as she entered the kitchen. He was standing at the stove, frying bacon in her mother's old cast-iron pan. He turned at the sound of her voice, his face lighting up. Good morning. I hope you don't mind that I started breakfast. Thought you might want a good meal before all the excitement today. Not at all, Faith replied, moving to stand beside him. Though I'm supposed to be nervous today, aren't I? Isn't that what brides are meant to feel? Adam slid an arm around her waist, drawing her close for a moment. And are you nervous? Faith considered the question seriously. No, she realized with some surprise. Not in the least. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Adam's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Neither have I. They ate breakfast together, planning the day ahead. Adam would return to the North Valley cabin to prepare it for their arrival that evening, while Faith would go to the Peterson home to dress for the ceremony. They would meet at the church at 2 o'clock, where Reverend Johnson, who had expressed only mild surprise at the hasty wedding plans, would perform the ceremony. What about those men? Faith asked as they cleared away the breakfast dishes. Do you think they've truly left town? Adam's expression grew serious. I'm going to check with Jenkins before I head north. If they're still around, I'll speak with the sheriff. Drunk or not, they attempted to break into your home. That's a crime that even Davis can't ignore." Faith nodded, relieved that Adam was taking the threat seriously. "Do you think they'll cause more trouble?" "Not if they know what's good for them," Adam replied, his voice hardening. Then, seeing Faith's concern, he softened his tone. "Don't worry about them today. This is our day and nothing is going to spoil it." By mid-morning, Adam had departed for town, promising to see Faith at the church. Mrs. Peterson arrived shortly after, full of excitement and bearing a small bouquet of late wildflowers tied with white ribbon. "For your wedding," she explained, handing the bouquet to Faith. "I know it's not much, but the season for flowers is nearly past." "They're beautiful," Faith assured her, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson." The older woman helped Faith pack a few essential belongings to take to the North Valley cabin, then accompanied her back to town. At the Peterson home, Mrs. Peterson enlisted her teenage daughter to help Faith with her hair and dress preparations. "My goodness, Mrs. Peterson breathed when Faith finally emerged in her mother's wedding dress, her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style. "You look absolutely beautiful, my dear," Faith smiled, grateful for the woman's kindness. "Do you think he'll like it?" Mrs. Peterson laughed. "Child, that man would think you beautiful in sackcloth, but yes, I believe he'll be quite speechless when he sees you." By 1:45, Faith was ready. Mr. Peterson offered to escort her to the church, taking the place her father would have filled had he lived. Faith accepted with a lump in her throat, touched by the community that had come together to support her on this important day. The small church was nearly full when Faith arrived. It seemed that most of Parowan had turned out to witness the wedding, despite the short notice. As Mr. Peterson led her down the aisle, Faith's eyes were fixed on Adam, who stood waiting for her beside Reverend Johnson. Adam was dressed in his best clothes, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. But it was the expression in his eyes as he watched her approach that took Faith's breath away, a look of such pure adoration and wonder that it made her heart swell with answering love. The ceremony itself was brief, but heartfelt. Faith and Adam exchanged vows in steady voices, their hands clasped tightly together as they promised to love and honor each other for all the days of their lives. When Reverend Johnson pronounced them husband and wife, Adam's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, drawing a few good-natured chuckles from the assembled guests. The celebration at the Peterson home afterward was lively, with food contributed by many of the town's families and music provided by a local fiddler. Faith was surprised to find herself enjoying every moment, especially seeing Adam's easy interaction with the townspeople who would now be their neighbors, albeit at a greater distance. As the afternoon light began to wane, Adam sought her out where she stood chatting with Mrs. Peterson and several other women. "We should think about heading home soon," he said softly. "It'll be dark before long, home." The word held new meaning now. Faith nodded, squeezing his hand. "Let me change first. I don't want to risk damaging Mother's dress on the ride." Once Faith had changed into a more practical traveling dress, they made their farewells to the guests. There were hugs and handshakes, good wishes, and a few ribald jokes that made Faith blush despite herself. "Have you checked about those men?" Faith asked quietly as Adam helped her mount the mare he had borrowed from the livery. Adam nodded, his expression reassuring. "Jenkins says they left town before midnight. Sheriff Davis confirmed they were seen heading south toward Cedar City again. They won't be bothering us." Relief washed over Faith. "Good. I wouldn't want anything to spoil today." The ride to their new home was peaceful, the autumn afternoon cooling rapidly as the sun descended toward the western mountains. They rode side by side, talking and laughing, occasionally reaching across to touch hands, both still marveling at the swift change in their circumstances. As they crested the final rise and the North Valley cabin came into view, Faith gasped in surprise. Smoke rose from the chimney and light glowed in the windows, creating a welcoming beacon in the gathering dusk. "How?" she began, turning to Adam in confusion. He smiled, pleased by her reaction. Jenkins's son. I gave him a key this morning and asked if he'd ride out ahead of us to light the fires and lamps. Didn't want to bring my bride home to a cold, dark house. Faith's heart swelled with love for this man who thought of such things, who cared for her comfort in these small but significant ways. It looks like home already, she said softly. It will be, Adam promised. Our home, the beginning of our life together. They dismounted in front of the cabin, and Adam secured the horses in the small barn with fresh hay and water. When he returned, Faith was still standing in the yard, looking up at the cabin with a sense of wonder. Having second thoughts? Adam asked, only half joking as he came to stand beside her. Faith shook her head. Just the opposite. I'm thinking how perfectly right this feels, how much it seems like this was meant to be. Adam smiled and, in a swift movement that made Faith laugh in surprise, swept her into his arms. Well, Mrs. Zane, he said, carrying her toward the door, let me welcome you home properly. He carried her across the threshold and set her down gently in the middle of the main room. Faith looked around, noting the changes Adam had made in the week since they had first visited. The floors had been swept clean, the windows washed, and simple curtains Faith had sewn herself hung at each window. A fire crackled cheerfully in the stone fireplace, and oil lamps cast a warm glow throughout the space. It's wonderful, Faith said, turning to face her husband. Truly, Adam. I couldn't have imagined a more perfect place for us to begin. Adam's smile deepened as he took her in his arms. And this is just the beginning, Faith. We have our whole lives ahead of us, a future to build together. As his lips met hers in a kiss that held all the promise of that future, Faith knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in the cabin itself, but in the arms of the man who had found her hiding in the woods and promised her safety. A promise he had kept and would continue to keep all the days of their lives together. 5 years later, Faith Zane stood on the porch of their expanded homestead, watching as her husband taught their 4-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. The small animal was the gentlest creature Adam could find, and Thomas sat proudly on its back, his face a miniature version of his father's with Faith's bright blue eyes. Not too fast, Adam, Faith called, shifting their 1-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, to her other hip. Remember what happened when you let him try to milk the cow? Adam grinned up at her, one hand steadying the pony while the other held Thomas securely in the saddle. That was different. Bessie was in a bad mood that day. He winked at their son. We'll take it nice and slow, won't we, partner? Thomas nodded solemnly, his small hands clutching the reins exactly as Adam had shown him. Slow and steady, Pa, like you said. Faith smiled, her heart full as she watched them together. The past 5 years had brought challenges, certainly harsh winters, difficult harvests, the usual trials of building a life in the rugged Utah territory. But they had faced each one together, their bond only strengthening with time and shared experiences. The North Valley homestead had prospered under their care. Adam had a natural talent for ranching, and their small herd of cattle had grown steadily each year. Faith had continued teaching, converting one room of their expanded cabin into a classroom where she now instructed 8 children from neighboring homesteads. Life was good, better than Faith had ever dared to dream on that frightening night when she had hidden among the trees, pursued by drunken men she feared would harm her. Those men had never returned to Parowan, and in time the memory of that night had faded, overshadowed by the joy that had followed. "Mama, look, I'm riding," Thomas called out, his face alight with excitement as Adam led the pony in a small circle. "I see you, sweetheart." Faith replied, smiling at her son's achievement. "You're doing wonderfully," Elizabeth squirmed in Faith's arms, reaching toward her brother and father. "Da, she babbled, one of her few clear words. "Soon enough, little one," Faith told her, kissing the top of her dark curls. "When you're bigger like Thomas." As if sensing her attention, Adam looked up at his wife and daughter, his face softening with love. "Why don't you two join us?" he suggested. "Rusty's saddled and ready for a family ride." Faith considered the stack of essays waiting to be graded in her classroom, then dismissed them from her mind. The beautiful autumn day was too perfect to waste indoors. I think that's an excellent idea, she agreed, descending the porch steps. Let me just get Elizabeth's bonnet. As they rode together across their land, Adam on Rusty with Elizabeth securely held before him. Faith on her own horse with Thomas sitting in front of her. Faith reflected on the strange workings of fate. Had she taken the main road home that night instead of fleeing into the woods, had Adam not been passing by at that exact moment, their paths might never have crossed. What are you thinking about? Adam asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. You're miles away. Faith smiled at her husband, the man who had transformed her life with his love and steadfast support. I was thinking about beginnings, about how something that seems frightening at first can lead to the greatest happiness. Adam's eyes softened with understanding. Like a frightened young woman hiding behind a tree in the dark, and a kind cowboy who stopped to help her, Faith added, who told her they're gone now and changed her world forever. Adam reached across the space between their horses to take her hand, his touch as reassuring and loving as it had been that first night in the woods. Best decision I ever made, stopping to help that woman, and the best words I ever heard, Faith replied, squeezing his hand. They're gone now. The beginning of our story. A story that's still being written, Adam said, glancing at their children, and keeps getting better with each chapter. As they continued their ride across the land they had nurtured together, Faith sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the twist of fate that had led her into those woods that night. What had begun in fear had blossomed into a love and life more fulfilling than she could have ever imagined, proof that even the darkest moments could lead to the brightest dawns. And as the autumn sun warmed their faces and their children's laughter filled the air, Faith knew with absolute certainty that this family, this love, this life they had built together was exactly where she was meant to be.